And good afternoon. This is Brian Almon of Gem State Substack. Thank you for those of us who are joining us, or those of you who are joining us live, and as well as those who will be catching up later. My guest today is Scott Cleveland, who is an independent conservative running for the U.S. Senate. Full disclosure, I knew Scott before. We worked together at the Eagle Chamber of Commerce and did some work on his computers. So it's been interesting watching somebody who I thought was just a regular guy, and now here he is on the campaign trail, on the debate stage for U.S. Senate. So, Scott, how are you doing today?
Brian, I'm great. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to our conversation. And yes, I am still just a regular guy. And thanks for all your help with my tech issues. That's kind of beyond my pay grade when I need help. I appreciate your expertise, as always.
Oh, no problem. So just to get started, tell me about the moment that you decided that you were going to actually do this. And,
Sure.
I could tell you're not doing this half-hearted. This isn't just, put your name on the ballot and get attention. You've been campaigning hard. What was it like, the process that brought you to this decision?
Well, there's only one reason to run in a race, Brian, and that is to win. And that is exactly what I plan on doing 32 days from today. I started a Patriot group here a couple of years ago. We're just a weekly political action group, and we meet and we vet candidates, and we talk politics, and we get involved in our local community as well. And slowly over time, as things developed since the 2020 election, we started looking at the competitive races, and I started considering running for office. And then my wife had a bout of cancer, sadly, and we had to make it through that and get her all healed up, and praise Jesus, she's now 100% cancer free and good to go. Then last summer, when Senator Crapo, my opponent, started voting with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me. And most people are afraid of these 40-year incumbent guys like Mike Crapo when it comes to their name recognition, their financing, and so on. Well, I'm running in this race for the right reasons. I see where America is headed. I don't like the direction our country is headed, and I'm resolved to do something about it. I'm a regular guy, a business owner. Like you said, I've never held public office, but we're not going to Mars. Other people have run successful campaigns as well. So I started giving it serious thought. And then last November 6th, I had a day out in my garden with my tomatoes. Come on, tomatoes, you can do it one more week. I talked to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And after dinner and a movie, I talked to my boss, Miss Kathy Cleveland, and I had a conversation, just said, honey, the country is headed in the wrong direction. It's getting worse by the day. And she agreed with me. And I told her that in my research, that if your spouse is not all in 100% in running in a campaign like this, that you shouldn't even bother, because as you can imagine, it's an all-consuming endeavor. And she gave me her blessing that evening, and by the next morning, November 7th, brother, I was out campaigning.
I've seen a lot of people in political life. I've watched their marriages fall apart, and it's sad to see. It's a stressful job, not only campaigning, but then once you're in office, all the things that are part of that. So I watched the debate earlier this week with the other candidates for Senate, Senator Crapo and Mr. Roth, and of course you. And that was pretty fun to see somebody that I knew up there on the stage, and I thought you did a great job.
Thank you.
What was it like preparing for the debate and then being there on stage live?
Sure. Well, it's an interesting process. What happens is a couple of months ago, I got a little postcard in the mail from Idaho Public Television, confirming that they were sending me. Confirming that they were sending me, the actual invitation. And once you send that invitation back in, then there's kind of a vetting process to make sure that you're a legitimate candidate. So I sent the postcard back in saying, yeah, I'm willing to participate in the debate. And then they're trying to line up the other candidates, the other major candidates. Then if they agree to it, then you have to prove that you're literally running a campaign. So you got to send in, your website, some of your swag, some of your information, so they can see that you're actually spending money and it is an active campaign, not just a campaign in name only. Then it was, I'll give Senator Crapo credit for agreeing to the debate. Most of our candidates here in the state, as you know, have been avoiding debating, even though they're the sitting office holders. That's true with Mike Simpson, Russ Fulcher, sadly, and also Governor Brad Little. They've all avoided the debate. So Senator Crapo, to his credit, decided to show up. I'm not sure that he doesn't regret that decision now, based on how things went, because we challenged his record. Both myself and the Democrat candidate David Roth, we challenged Mike Crapo's record. It's not a personal attack. As far as getting ready and preparing for it, I've never once been to a debate in my life, Brian. I've never gone through debate class in school or anything else, but you can learn how to do anything on the internet these days. So I prepared for it. I've been answering questions from real voters and citizens of Idaho for 10 months straight now. So I wasn't too concerned I was going to get a question that I didn't know anything about or know the answer to. It's just a matter of what is your personal position and how do you want to frame your answer? Again, you saw the candidates don't ask questions directly of each other like they do in some formats. And so Idaho Public Television, in my opinion, was very fair and balanced and did a great job on the debate, and I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, well, it looked fun. I'm not sure I would have had such composure up there, but no, I thought you did a great job. One of the biggest hurdles, I'd say, for challenging a sitting Republican senator from the right is that there's a fear amongst voters, especially Republican voters, that
Yes.
if they vote for you, they would split the vote and allow the
Yeah.
Democrat to win, which would be even worse. And I know your website has a rebuttal to that,
Right.
but
Yeah.
How do you feel confident that no matter what happens, that even if you aren't successful, that you're not going to swing the election to the
Right.
left?
Well, that's a valid concern of the voters, and there's two parts to it. The first part is, what is your choice right now without me in the race? Let's suppose for a minute that I'm not in the race. Your choice is a Democrat or Democrat light, being Mike Crapo. That's what I call him, Democrat light, because he does vote with the Democrats now, and he's been very inconsistent in the last couple of years in his voting record. Just about 6 weeks ago, he voted against a veterans package. He's trying to undo some of the Chinese Trump trade tariffs. And I won't go on and on about it, but those are your choices without me in the race. But with me in the race, as an independent conservative, we say it all in one breath, the mathematics look like this. Okay? You cannot beat these guys running as a Republican in the primary. Many good people have tried and failed at that, including some people in our local area. Now, the good news in the primary this year, 33% of the registered Republican voters rejected Mike Crapo as their representative in the primary. So that block of voters, as long as they're made aware of me as an alternative, as a true conservative alternative to Crapo, they're not going to go back and vote for Mike Crapo in the general election. They're probably going to vote for me. As far as the Democrat goes, if you look at election history, going back 20, 30 years, what you'll find is in a true three-way race between three candidates in Idaho, in a statewide race now, not a local race, but a statewide race, the Democrat candidate rarely, if ever, tops 30, 32% maximum. And this particular candidate, in my opinion, is not a strong Democrat candidate. So let's say that the Democrat candidate receives 30% of the vote in the general election. That leaves 70% for Crapo and I to fight over. And no matter how you divide the number 70 by 2, okay, you're not going to get a percentage that is higher than the 30% that the Democrat received. So you're not going to have a blue takeover of the U.S. Senate seat in Idaho, no matter how you slice it. And my path to victory looks like this. I can win this race with as little as 34% of the statewide total. And I'd like to have a little bit more than that as a cushion, but it looks like this. 34% for Cleveland, 33% Crapo, 32% for your Democrat, and that leaves 1% for your Libertarian and your Constitution Party, which aren't running real campaigns, and they will receive 1% or less of the statewide total. So you don't have to worry about us splitting the vote and we end up with some Democrat. That's just the math of it, and it does check out.
So with that in mind, then, that echoes back. So with that in mind, then, would you, if you won, assuming you win, would you then caucus with the Republicans and be part of the Republican majority?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I'm a lifelong Republican until just 2 years ago, and there are good reasons for that. However, some of the current Republican leadership, I just refuse to go along with. The Mitch McConnells of the world, the Kevin McCarthy's of the world, the Tom Lunas here in Idaho. These are the good old boy established network, and they're just part of the uniparty. So yes, to answer your question directly, I would caucus with the Republicans unless, Brian, they're trying to push through something that is stupid. The reckless spending that's going on in this country is an example of that. And I don't care if they're Republicans. I don't care if I'm caucusing with them most of the time. I still want to remain independent. I'm beholden to nobody. I don't answer to corporate donors or anyone except Jesus Christ and my wife, in that order. And I'm okay with that. I sleep. I'm not trying to join their good old boys network or club. I don't need anything from the people in Washington. I want to represent the voters of Idaho and, by extension, the United States of America.
So I have a bit of a wild question then.
All right, hit me, brother.
Let's say you're in there and Joe Biden steps down for whatever reason, his popularity, his health, whatever. Kamala Harris becomes president. And now the Senate is tasked with confirming her appointee as the vice president. According to the 25th Amendment, both houses would have to confirm that nominee.
Yeah.
Obviously, she's going to nominate a Democrat, but if the Republicans, and with you part of them, control the Senate, you have a lot of leverage. Is there a moderate Democrat that you would agree to support for vice president, or would you just hold the line and say, no, you don't get to have one?
I haven't met that person yet. I guess we'd cross that bridge when we get to it is a good answer. But I don't have a lot of love for any moderate Democrats because I don't know that there are such things in our current United States Senate.
Yeah, it does seem like the two parties are polarizing, and obviously even in the Republican Party, there's a lot of battling over principles.
Well, you're exactly right. Right now, the Senate is tied. 50 asked this question on the campaign trail. What power do you, little old senator from the little old state of Idaho? And I said, you have just as much stroke from Idaho as you do from any other state. 1 out of 100 is the same percentage. And there's the answer to that question.
Well, with the 50-50 Senate, we've seen the power wielded by Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, as they, each time they buck their own party, they basically hold the entire thing in the balance. So yeah, one senator can have a lot of power.
Yeah, it's a sad day in America when the Republicans, the conservatives, have to rely on crossover votes from Democrats. That's a sad day.
Yes. So what in your background and experience would serve you and serve the people of Idaho in the
Sure.
Senate? What do you bring to the table?
Sure. Well, it's a fair question, and I'll go back to my regular guy answer. I don't think we benefit from career politicians. As you know, I'm an investment advisor by trade, and I have been for the last 30 years. I've been married successfully and faithfully for 33 years. I have a wide variety of experience and, more importantly, positions of trust. I've held several treasurer positions. I currently manage tens of millions of dollars of client money, and they expect you to do the right things. And, when a politician says, oh, you should trust me, I think you should really question that. The first thing you should look at is, are they trustworthy? Have they held positions of trust and honored that? Well, in my business, financial business, if you don't do a good job, or you cut corners, or you don't tell the truth, you're not in the investment business very long. So that means a lot to me. Also, as a treasurer for a couple of organizations, granted, it's not the national debt we're talking about here, but it's still a position of trust where people expect you to pay the bills on time and keep an eye on the money. I think that's important. My life experience is pretty well rounded. I've worked construction, I've worked both in a Fortune 100 firm. I spent 23 years with a shall be nameless Fortune 100 company. So I've dealt with the bureaucracy and political correctness inside the corporate world. But also 8 years ago, I became self-employed again, and I have a small shop, and I meet payroll every 2 weeks on Friday. So I've had good times in my life, Brian. I've had bad times. I'm blessed. I'm a Christian. And I think all of that just adds up to making good decisions. And good decisions are not that hard to make when you're a well-grounded person in your personal and your spiritual life. And I think I have that. As far as the complexities of the United States Senate and all the mechanics and gyrations of how things work in Washington, ultimately what it comes down to is you're supposed to evaluate a piece of legislation and determine whether it is good or bad for the general public, the average American person, not the corporations. And you know what? That can't be that difficult. Look at the people that are doing it now. I'm pretty confident that I can figure it out.
It's interesting to bring up your background as a financial advisor, because in that position, you have a fiduciary duty. You know, if you mismanage your client's money or you use it, you know, to get personal gain, you know, the government will actually prosecute you. Wouldn't it be interesting if our representatives had the same legally binding fiduciary duty to their constituents?
Yes, I don't like to call the people in Washington our leaders because they're failing miserably at leading the country. What I do prefer to call them is representatives. And you're exactly right, Brian. A fiduciary is supposed to represent the interest of their clients ahead of or in front of their own. And if you don't do that, you can lose your license, your securities license, and get sued. So it's not a big leap to go from being a financial fiduciary to being a legislative fiduciary, if there is such a thing, because that's all you're really supposed to do. You're supposed to represent the best interests of the people of America ahead of your own. Sadly, many of our politicians in Washington have been lining their own pockets. When they spend 20, 30, 40-year careers in Washington, D.C., they become fabulously wealthy when their salary's not that high. It doesn't take much to connect those dots. How do you become wealthy while you're not earning, that kind of income? I mean, they do okay, but it's because of their insider trading, their sweetheart deals. And I'm not saying every member of Congress, I'm saying too many of them. And we need to resolve that issue as well.
Would you support some sort of ban on representatives owning stock or trading stock while they're in office?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be 100% on board for that. That's not the only reform that we need, but I'd be okay with that.
I've heard people talk about that, and it's making the rounds. And that's a bipartisan issue. There are people in both parties,
Sure.
if you look at the list, who
Absolutely
are becoming very wealthy.
You're not supposed to get rich while you're in office. That's a simple one.
So, what are some of your, you've already touched on this a little bit, but what are some of your biggest disagreements with the incumbent senator? Areas where he's gone one way, you would go the other, or where you think he's not fulfilled his obligation to the people of Idaho?
Right. Well, probably the biggest one was the infrastructure bill. That was last summer. August 10th is when the vote was held. And I think only 16 Republican senators crossed over. Now, whenever the Republicans cave in to Democrat legislation, it's called bipartisan. But it doesn't ever seem to work the other way. Anyways, if you examine the infrastructure bill, remember, coming off of COVID, where they just spent $4 or $5 trillion, printed money out of thin air, for the COVID pandemic, then they want to just keep going with this Build Back Better bill, and the combined package was about $7 trillion. And they quickly figured out that the American people are not going to be happy if we pass another $7 trillion of spending. So let's break it into small chunks. And they took that bill, and the main chunk of it was the infrastructure bill at $1.25 trillion. If you've examined what was in that bill, you'll quickly learn that only 10% of it had anything to do with roads, bridges, highways, high-speed internet, that kind of thing. And the other 90% of that bill was just a bunch of green energy nonsense for their political cronies. People like Al Gore, they got rich over this, a decade or more ago. So that's what I object to. I don't see how we can continue our debt level at 31 trillion. Just Monday night of this week, I predicted the national debt clock would click over 31 trillion, and that's exactly what it did. 31 trillion and counting. And keep in mind that, Senator Crapo can distance himself all he wants, but he's been in office for over 30 years now. And the national debt has increased while he's been in office 667%. It was 4 trillion and now it's 31 trillion. And I'm not saying he's responsible for all of it, but when you start tacking on bills, a trillion here, a trillion there, you get there in a hurry. And how much did Idaho benefit from that bill directly? 0.18%. 0.18, not 18%, 0.18. And yet the taxpayers of Idaho are on the hook for every dime of that 1.25 trillion. That's probably the biggest one, but it's not the only one. He voted against our U.S. military veterans not too long ago, about 6 or 7 weeks ago, on what's called the PACT Act. And I've heard his explanation on that one as well, Brian. It had some pork in it, but it also benefited people that served our country with faith and distinction, and they have ongoing medical issues, and he abandoned them. He betrayed them. He should have voted for that bill because, if you're going to have a bill, if you got to vote for pork, I'm not a fan of pork. I said it in the debate, but you know what? I'm going to err on the side of our U.S. military veterans receiving what they need instead of a bunch of green energy folks receiving $1 trillion plus that they don't really need. That's where I would have come down on those two votes.
That brings me to this idea that at the federal level, they have these bills full of pork. Both the infrastructure bill, the PACT Act, they unlike in Idaho, where we're at least supposed to have single issue bills, there at the federal government, they take these omnibus bills where they cram it full of everything. And you guys talked about it at the debate. So when you're in the Senate and you're presented with something like this hurricane relief bill they passed for Florida, but also put another $12 billion for Ukraine in it, and nothing to do with what the bill is actually supposed to be about. When you're presented with that, how do you decide if you're going to support it because there's something good in it, even though there might be a ton of bad stuff? Or do you dig in your heels and say, no, I'm not going to support this, and face the media criticism that, oh, look, you're voting against the troops, or, oh, look, you're voting against hurricane relief, or whatever?
Well, I get that question a lot, and I've given it a lot of thought. In fact, I got a question online this morning that was very similar in nature to your question. And my idea is this: why can't a sitting United States senator produce his own competing bill? Let's use the Florida hurricane relief as an example. Why don't you quickly put together a competing bill without the $12 billion for Ukraine in it and try to force a vote on both of those bills? Then we're going to find out who supports the pork-laden bill and who supports the underlying important urgent issue. We do have urgent issues. We do need to spend money as a federal government, but those are taxpayer dollars. They're sacred dollars, and they should be treated as such and not flung around all over the world or for our lobbyists and special interest groups. That's the way that I look at it. And I don't know why you can't just try to support a competing bill that is a single issue bill. And we should be able to do that in our United States Senate.
Well, I've heard that the majority leader has a lot of power there, and that Schumer is not going to allow any competing bill to come to the floor. And then, if you have a Republican majority, probably going to be Senator Mitch McConnell again as majority leader. And I've heard your opinion on him. Who do you think would make a good majority leader of the Republican side? Somebody who would actually play fair and advance a conservative agenda?
Well, I like people that are members of the Freedom Caucus. Right now, probably somebody like a Jim Jordan or even a Rand Paul has been pretty solid lately. I think he's fiscally responsible. Those two names come to mind. I would not support Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell. And losing elections like the 2020 election, including those 2 Senate seats down in Georgia, that has had disastrous consequences for the entire United States and by extension the world. What's good for America is good for the rest of the world. And anybody that wants to argue that differently doesn't know what they're talking about. So goes America, so goes the fortunes of many of the people around the globe.
That's true for better or for worse. Speaking of things around the globe, the Senate has voted several times over the past year to allocate more and more money toward Ukraine with money and arms and everything
Yes.
else. Uh, do you think this is a good use of taxpayer money? And also, to at the broader issue, what should be the stance of our government toward the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Okay. Well, Brian, I look back to history to answer the question. America all too often has gotten involved in foreign conflicts all over the world, unnecessarily, in my opinion, and with disastrous results in terms of our treasury and the blood of our American soldiers and innocents. And as far as Ukraine and Russia goes, do I like what Vladimir Putin is doing when he's taking territory held by another country, Ukraine? I don't like it one bit. I think he's a bully. I think he's a dictator. I think he's just a neighborhood troublemaker, if you will. But is that our fight to fight? I don't think it is. I don't see why the European Union, it's in their backyard. I don't see them spending billions and trillions of dollars to protect the Ukrainians. So why do we have to be leading the way when it comes to sending American taxpayer dollars halfway around the world to stop some skirmish? Okay, now, it's not that I don't care and feel for the Ukrainian people. I do. I have one on my staff, on my campaign staff. And we have many deep discussions about this. But that's not a good use. We should not be involved in that conflict. And Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world, second only to Russia. So for every dollar we send over there, maybe at best 20 cents actually helps the Ukrainian people, and the rest of it goes who knows where. So I object to those things based on past results. And we have to have the will to say, you know what? Not our problem to solve, not our fight to fight. And when we start doing that and using those dollars for the American people that need it and deserve it and should be receiving it, I can think of veterans groups, homeless people, mental illness issues. We have plenty of good uses for that money right here in the U.S. That's my answer. That's my response. And that'll be my position as your next United States Senator.
And when we talk about the welfare of the Ukrainian people, I could almost make the case that our intervention and our support is actually prolonging the suffering, because we've been pushing them to not seek a negotiated settlement, which might end the conflict, because we are using, I believe, we're using the Ukrainian people as cannon fodder in our proxy war with Russia.
Right.
Talking about these various things, foreign relations, I know Idaho's other senator, Jim Risch, he's the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee. And so if once the Republicans take the Senate, I assume he'll be the chairman. But your background's in finance as well. What committee would you like to be on? Where do you think you could do the most good?
Well, I think anything to do with money, based on my financial and my experience with the tax code and so on. Appropriations wouldn't be a bad place. Budget wouldn't be a bad place. And based on what's going on in our southern border, we're being invaded on a daily basis. I wouldn't even mind a committee assignment on Homeland Security, because I think I could give some valuable input on what needs to happen on our southern border. Our country is being invaded by over 200,000 foreigners a month. That is a national security interest if there ever was one.
What would you do from the Senate to handle the influx of people coming in across the border?
Okay. Well, our framing fathers of the country, they have three branches of government, and they gave the power of the purse to the legislative branch of government. And it's really the only tool that you have to constrain the out of control executive branch. It's not a judicial issue so much as the executive branch. They're deliberately having our country invaded. So what do? Well, one thing that you've noticed, Brian, is every 6 months in our country, because of our debt now, they have to raise the debt ceiling. And they come around and convince all the voters and all the American citizens that, we're headed for financial Armageddon if we don't raise this debt ceiling again and again and again. It's like a broken record. So when I'm sitting in the United States Senate a year from now and they come up to that issue again, assuming Joe Biden's still in office and the border is not secure, my answer is going to be this. I am not going to talk to you guys about raising the debt ceiling, not one stinking penny, until that U.S. southern border is secure to my satisfaction. when that border is secure and we're no longer being invaded, then we can have a discussion about money. And if you don't like it, too bad. That is the only power that you have. And it is a very important power as a sitting United States senator, especially when the vote is like this, right? 50-50, we're talking about it very tight. So they're going to have to come around to my way of thinking. I'm not the only one that feels that way. Ask somebody that's lost a son or a daughter to a fentanyl overdose, the sex trafficking, the unvetting of, we have terrorists coming from the Middle East that are completely unvetted, pouring into this country, entering into the heartland, and don't let anybody tell you they don't end up here in Idaho. These people absolutely end up all over the country, including the great state of Idaho.
Yeah, it seems like the border is just one of many areas where the current administration is completely failing us.
Sure. Well, it's deliberate. It's not an accident. I would feel differently about it, perhaps, if it was accidental or an oversight. But make no mistake, this is a deliberate act on their part. It's a violation of their oath of office and the United States Constitution. And our sitting senators sit on their hands and turn a blind eye to it. And when you challenge them on it, Brian, all they do is tell you, oh, hey, that's not my department. That's not under my purview. That's somebody else's business, which is a bunch of nonsense. If we had any senators with any backbone, they'd be leading the charge to get that border closed up as much as possible. And yet you hear almost nothing about it other than a few platitudes when asked about it.
I get the feeling a lot of times that a lot of the long-term, old guard Republicans who are in the Senate and the House, governor's offices throughout the country, I think they've been in office so long that they don't notice how much the country has changed. You're talking about this invasion across the southern border, and if they don't see it, they might not understand the gravity of the situation. That's my sense. So someone like Senator Crapo, he's been in office for a long, long time.
Sure.
How do you think the world has changed since he's elected, and what kind of new approach do we need in our government and in the Senate, especially, to handle these rapidly changing and deteriorating times?
Well, I'll answer your question this way. I don't believe that Senator Mike Crapo actually lives in the state of Idaho anymore. And I know I get challenged on that, and everybody says, oh, you can't say that, you can't prove that. Well, I might not be able to prove it, but I'll point this out. Supposedly, Senator Crapo is from Idaho Falls. And I gave a presentation in Idaho Falls not too long ago to a crowd of about 60 people. And when I made the claim from the podium that I don't think Mike Crapo actually lives in Idaho anymore, I'm sure he has an apartment somewhere or a residential address, but he doesn't spend any time here, and that's the problem. This woman's hand in the back of the audience goes up, and I called on her, and she said, yes, Senator Crapo is my neighbor. And I said, oh, well, maybe I'm mistaken. Could you let us know how often you see the good Senator Crapo in your neighborhood? She says, I've never once seen him, ever. Okay, so there's your answer. As far as the people and where they end up and how out of touch these people are, I spent 9 days at the Eastern Idaho State Fair talking to real voters and would-be voters. 9 days, 10-hour days. Mrs. Cleveland was with me. It was grueling. It was hot. It was 97 degrees, but we enjoyed our time there. However, on the Saturday night, the first Saturday night we were there, the crowd filled in. There's a quarter of a million visitors during this fair run. And on that Saturday night in Blackfoot, Idaho, the crowd was 80% Hispanic. Wall to wall, 80% Hispanic. I have nothing against Hispanics that are here legally. I have friends of mine, lifelong friends. I grew up in New Mexico. It's not a racial issue. It's an immigration issue. And I can tell you that not all of these folks were in the country legally. And how are they dominating our population if we're not being invaded? And that has to be addressed. That is not sustainable to have our country have 2.5, 3 million illegal invaders. They broke the law to be here. And we do have recourse. There are things that can be done. It's not easy. It takes political will to do it. But my point going back is Senator Crapo, he wasn't at the fair. He's not spending any time with regular folks. When he's on duty, he's in Washington. When he's off duty, he's in Washington. When he's not in Washington, He's in Utah with his wife and grandkids. Great, go spend time with your grandkids. I get that. But he's almost never in Idaho. Brian, you will never run into him at Winco, the gas station, or the dry cleaner in your life, ever. He comes around every 6 years and says, I'm your guy, vote for me, because I'm going to continue the fight. I'm going to finish what I started. Well, this country's a mess. So I say, Senator, please stop. Don't finish what you started, because you've done a miserable job to this point.
Have you had the chance to speak to Senator Crapo directly during this campaign?
We've made a couple introductions a couple times. One of them was really pretty funny. Early in the year in January, we were at a Lincoln Day event up in Haley, and I'm not breaking any confidence by sharing this. And I've met the senator a few times, and he's working the line. He finally shows up at an event with his blue polyester sport coat and cowboy boots and jeans. That's the standard attire for politicians in Idaho. Anyways, he's working his way down the line, and he comes up and says, we're out in the foyer waiting for the event to start. He comes up and says, hi, I'm Senator Mike Crapo. And I said, well, hello, Senator Crapo. We've met before, although it's been a while. He says, oh, okay. And your name is? And I said, I'm Scott Cleveland. And he kind of looked at me, Brian, and he looked like this, and off he went. he just exited stage left. I wish I'd have had a videotape of that, because there was just this blank look, and he goes, oh, like you're that guy. And off he went. But we haven't had any policy discussions. We did meet he and his wife again at the debate at Idaho Public Television, but it's just, polite. Hi, how you doing? And even after the debate, we did shake hands and wish each other well. And he headed for the elevator in short order, and he flew out of the state immediately. Now, whether he went to Washington or Utah is anybody's guess, but maybe that's why there's a disconnect with these people. He doesn't live in Idaho any more than Liz Cheney lives in the great state of Wyoming, if you know what I'm saying.
When you mentioned that the jeans, cowboy boots, and blue shirt was the uniform of the Idaho politician, I had to go back, had a chance to briefly just, shake the hand of the senator at the convention. And
yeah, there you go.
That's what he was wearing.
That's it. He's only missing the polyester sport coat. It's probably too hot.
Yeah, it was pretty hot there.
Speaking of that photograph from the GOP convention, his helicopter, he came in a helicopter, and that helicopter, when it left the convention, it flew out of here. It flew to Utah. It did not fly to anywhere in Idaho.
Well, do you think that's just something that happens as you've been in politics a long time, that you get more and more,
Yes.
You look at the Liz Cheney example. I think that might be the most egregious one. Her family obviously had roots in Wyoming, but she grew up in the Beltway. She grew up in the swamp. Her dad was involved in politics from since the Ford administration or the Nixon administration, and so that's the environment she grew up. And when it was time for her to take her position, it was her turn. She went back to Wyoming because that's where her family had name recognition, but I'm told she didn't spend any time there. She even did her, she spent I think she spent the night of the election in DC or Virginia. Do you think that's just something that happens naturally over time? I mean, if you got into the Senate and spent 1 term, 2 terms, would you still be spending as much time here as possible, or would you find yourself drawn into that nexus of power?
No, you know what? I'm not interested in being in the cool kids club. I would spend as little time in Washington, D.C. and parts therein as humanly possible. And Brian, for the record, I'm already 61 years old. I'm not looking for a 30-year career in Washington, D.C. I would love to go serve the people for a 6-year term and do my best and make an evaluation at the end of my first term. Am I enjoying the job and the role that I'm doing? And if I was, perhaps I might stay for a 2nd term. But after 2 terms in Washington, D.C., I would be at an age where you should begin to enjoy the 3rd phase of your life, which is called retirement, and all that comes with that. That's kind of what my position is. I would spend as much time in Idaho as I do now, except for my time that I was required to be in Washington, D.C. And that doesn't happen. And that, again, you're building the case slowly but surely for term limits. This country is in, I know not everybody agrees with term limits, and I have this argument on the campaign trail. Oh, you have a right, you have a chance to vote them out every 2 years or every 4 years or 6 years for a senator. And my response to that argument against term limits is, how's that working out for us right now? How's that going right now? And they're like, well, not good. I said, okay, then maybe we should consider term limits for members of Congress.
I can definitely see both sides of the term limits debate. Obviously, incumbents enjoy a huge advantage in name recognition and a built-in power structure. On the other hand, I do worry that term limits would just strengthen the federal bureaucracy because then they would have even more power over. You wouldn't have the time to get in there and learn how to manipulate the system. You would just go in there and be a tool of the system. But I mean, that's its own problem anyway. The fact that our federal bureaucracy and the congressional staffs are so powerful. It's funny, some of these people have been in power so long. You look at the average age. I saw a graph the other day. I don't have it up, showing the average age of Congress
over time
is just massively gone up.
Yeah.
So somebody like Senator Reich or Senator Crapo, in any other job they would be at around their retirement age.
That's right.
In our current Congress, they're some of the younger folks.
Yeah. We have a couple of senators approaching their 90s almost. And if we're going to go ahead and vote for change and implement change in this country, not only should we have term limits, we should have an upper age limit. I haven't been 80 years old yet, and I have friends who are pretty cognizant, clear into their 90s and so on, but that's not the average. That's the exception. Many CEOs are forced to retire when they hit age 65 or 70 at the outset. I don't know why that same logic doesn't apply to our representatives. I'd sign off on that. And once you reach that age, you don't have to pass a competency test. You just reach that age. That means, boom, you're not eligible for re-election to the House or Senate beyond that. Period. End of discussion.
It seems like you get some people, your Dianne Feinsteins or Chuck Grassley's, Joe Biden,
right?
Even Donald Trump is nearing 80 years old, and it's like they have the position, they've been there so long, and their voters keep reelecting them. To your point about incumbents having too much power, perhaps because they think that they've done a great job thus far. And
well, let's look at my race as an example of that. Senator Mike Crapo, if you go on the federal election website, you're a data guy, you can do this fairly easily. You can look at all of his donations, corporate donations and personal combined, and look at where that money comes from. He's got currently about $5.6 million in his campaign coffers, give or take. And if you sort it out, filter that Excel spreadsheet by where it comes from, you will find that only 2% of that money comes from the state of Idaho, and 98% of it comes from outside of the state of Idaho. Now, if that isn't sending up a giant red flag as to some campaign finance reform, I don't know what is. So it's very hard for someone like me or a Democrat to come in and compete against that. And they count on that. That's what those lobbyists are there for, is banking on you carrying their water for them. And I'd love to see some campaign finance reform that puts an actual cap. I have no problem with money, and I'm not afraid of competition. I'm a free market capitalist kind of guy. But when it comes to politics, all of a sudden these guys got, and that's a small number for a U.S. senator, having 6 million. Some of them have 10 or 20 million, and they can literally just crush the competition. And I'm hoping to break that cycle. I might end up raising, Brian, 1/100th of what Senator Crapo has for his reelection. So when you hear those TV ads and those radio ads every 30 seconds, you know who's funding that? Bill Gates, Pfizer, Facebook, Google. It's not the citizen voters of Idaho. And so we have to be aware of that. And you're right, we do have the power to change it, but it's not easy.
Yeah. That's for sure. It's funny. You look at approval ratings of various, figures, say Mitch McConnell or, even Nancy Pelosi on the Democrat side. A lot of people disapprove of them, but they keep getting reelected anyway. And I think with the federal Congress, there's this idea that even if I don't approve of this person, well, they've been in office so long that they've got so much power that it's good for our state, that it's good for Idaho if, Mike Crapo is still in the Senate because he can divert resources this way. I've heard that argument before.
Yeah. Well, the argument against that is, look at the state of affairs for us as a country. We're being invaded. energy prices through the roof. Things are not going well. The stock market's in the tank. I hate to see that. My clients are calling and asking me about that. And I'm like, well, we're going to have to hang on until we see what happens in the midterms and then maybe make a course correction based on that. Like you, I am confident that conservatives, Republicans anyways, are going to take the House back. And I think we have a real good chance of taking the Senate over. And then at least we'll be able to tap the brakes on this just absurd, ridiculous America Last policy being brought to us by the Biden administration.
I have a few questions about some specific issues about where you stand on them.
Okay.
One of the many issues coming before Congress right now is a bill to codify gay marriage at the federal level, because there are some who are afraid that the Supreme Court might overturn Obergefell the same way they overturned Roe v. Wade.
Right.
Would you vote for a bill to codify that at the federal level, or would you leave that at the state level?
So here's my position. It's real straightforward. If we would only follow the United States Constitution for a change, we'd all be a lot better off. So how is it designed to work? Anything that is not provided for in the United States Constitution is a states' right issue. And the issue of gay marriage should not escape that. Gay marriage should not have been decided by the Supreme Court, and it should be left up to each and individual state. Now, on a personal level, although I am a Christian, and I know what the Bible says about gay, homosexuality and so on, but me personally, I'm okay with gay people. I've worked with gay co-workers. I know friends that are gay. It's not a lifestyle that I would condone or promote, but strictly speaking, in this modern world we live in, I can get along with those people. I'm not here to judge what two consenting adults choose to do in their personal life, in their bedroom. And if they want to get married and have a civil union and even raise children, as long as it's not some perverse thing, I'm okay with that. Now, I know that angers some of my Christian followers, but you know what? That is my position. I'm not going to change it. I don't think we need to undo anything. I think it should not have been decided, though, at a federal level by the Supreme Court, because those are unelected people. It's a long answer to a short question. I hope I did okay.
I imagine your answer to this one will be similar then. Let's go to the other big controversial issue, abortion.
Right.
The Democrats, in the wake of the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade and returned the issue to the states, they want to codify what they call codify Roe, but really it's establishing a right to abortion with no restrictions in the entire country at the federal level. Meanwhile, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina recently proposed a national abortion ban at the 15-week level, I believe was his.
Right.
Would you support either of those? Would you support any federal regulation of abortion, or would you just leave it as it is now in the wake of Dobbs, where it is each state to decide itself?
Yes, this one they got right. They're following the Constitution. They returned that issue to the states where it should be. And I don't think no matter how you frame the argument, and people are going to agree or disagree, people feel very strongly about this issue, but in no universe do I condone the taking of a human life. And so I will always be a pro-life candidate. And I do make the limited exception in case there was, incest, rape, where the life of the mother is clearly threatened. I would make those exceptions. And then I get the haters jumping on that issue too, the purist. And you know what? Somebody taught me a long time ago that no matter what you do, Brian, some people aren't going to like it. And how you do something, people aren't going to like it. And that's okay. That's my position on abortion. And even though Idaho has a very strict interpretation, I look for more legislative action on that same issue here in Idaho in the next session. But I think the Supreme Court, in this example, got it right.
So would you support a federal restriction, like Senator Graham has proposed, or would you just leave it entirely to the states?
Leave it entirely to each state.
So speaking of children and protecting them, people are really starting to raise the alarm about essentially child grooming through schools and through entertainment and through materials that are available to them at public libraries. Is there anything that you can see in the role of the U.S. Senate at the federal level to protect them, or is it once again something that states need to take on?
I think it's something that the states need to take on, and I think you're seeing that movement happen now. in the last 2 years, especially in light of COVID and all that came along with it, parents finally got more involved in what their children were learning. One of my territory managers homeschools her kids, and rightly so. When you see what's going on in some of these public education, I don't mind calling them government schools. They are government schools. It's horrific, some of the teachings. And I don't think the education of our children, small children, 5-year-olds, fifth graders, what have you, I don't think they need to be teaching them anything about sex education. I think that comes a little bit later. And so as much as it bothers me, I still don't think that the federal government should be put in charge of the school system. In fact, I'd like to see the school systems. I'm a pro school choice candidate. And I think the taxpayer dollars should follow the parents. If you're homeschooling your children, if your children are going to a Christian school or any other private learning institution, your tax dollars ought to follow them. And my theory is this: when you increase competition into a system, Brian, you're going to get two outcomes every single time. If it's true competition, you're going to get higher quality at lower prices. And that theory applies not only to the business world, it applies to schools as well. And the teachers union doesn't like it very much because you're taking money away from them and their administrators. But you know what? The truth hurts only when it ought to.
I was just watching some Democrat candidates today deriding the idea of school choice and money following the student. They say it's an attack on public schools. And you read between the lines there, and the Democrats would rather just shut down all alternative school ideas entirely. If they could, pass any law they wanted, I'm sure they'd ban homeschooling. They'd probably ban private schools, or at least have government oversight of them, because they don't want people learning anything outside of their control.
They're not acting in the students' best interest. They're acting in their own financial interest, and that's the problem.
So a couple more questions here about what you would do in the Senate. We've seen an alarming rise in the use of federal agencies like the FBI to target political opponents. Just this last couple of weeks, a bunch of pro-life pastors who were protesting at abortion clinics years ago are now being dragged out of their homes by armed agents. And then you had the raid on Mar-a-Lago, where they went in and rifled through President Trump stuff. So in the meantime, it's we're seeing people who riot or tear down statues or burn down buildings even get off scot-free. And so it seems like our federal law enforcement agencies are being weaponized to be used against one side of the country. So what would you do in the Senate? That is an area where you would have a lot of influence. Would you, try and regulate them more? Would you replace their leadership, or would you just, vote to abolish the FBI entirely?
Well, I don't think you can abolish the agencies entirely, but it's another example of America clearly being headed in the wrong direction. We have a two-tiered justice system in this country. Again, these are clear violations of the United States Constitution and the people that work in those agencies' sworn oath of offices. And yet it's happening more and more frequently. All you have to do is watch the news, and it's unfortunate, but it is reversible. So once in the Senate, what can you do about it? Well, again, all of these agencies, they work off of the power of the purse, Brian. So we have to take back power. We have to get back the House and the Senate as best we can. Depending on what happens with the White House race in 2024, you might see a purging of the leadership of this. But it goes beyond just the leadership. It's not just the leadership. If you look at vote history for the District of Columbia, 95% of federal employees donate money to Hillary Clinton's campaign in the election between Hillary and Donald Trump. 95% of the federal employees donate to the left. So there's a lot of work to be done there. You might knock off the head Christopher Wray of the FBI and get rid of Merrick Garland at the Department of Justice, but that doesn't solve the problem. You still have to go down through the rank and file and get them to just follow the law and not make it one-sided. You're exactly right. If you're a BLM Antifa protester, you get the probation, time served treatment. But if you're a January 6th protester or something like that, you might still be sitting in that DC gulag. and your Sixth and your Eighth Amendment civil rights are being violated on a daily basis. The right to a fair and speedy trial, and no harsh treatment or unjust punishment while in prison. And those are being violated deliberately by this Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, and whose hand is all over that? Joe Biden. Those are being treated as political prisoners, and they are. I'm not saying that anybody that broke the law shouldn't be dealt with accordingly. But when you look at how these people have been in prison for almost 18, 20 months in some cases, without having their due process, it is ridiculous. It is absurd, and people are onto it. And I would like to be a voice in that fight once I'm in the United States Senate. I would call for some investigations into those issues.
Well, hopefully the Republican majority next year will be able to do something about that, because right now all they've been able to do is go do some, a couple photo ops and a few tweets about it, and
Yeah.
I don't really see anything being done. But
Yeah.
speaking of the upcoming election and the 2024 election, where we might have a new president,
Okay.
I know one of your big issues is election integrity. During the debate, the
Sure.
moderator seemed confused as to why you would not support the bipartisan electoral count act. But of course, we could see that the Democrats in power right now, they want to federalize, they want to nationalize our elections so that states don't have the right to conduct them as they see fit, whether it's with photo ID or paper ballots or whatever. So what kind of things would you want to see, both at a state level and at a national level, to make sure that we can have trust in our elections, that they are counted properly?
Sure. Well, there's a couple things, and I do think the elections should be left up to the states. And so here in Idaho, I've been active in the election integrity movement, and it's a complex issue. Nothing wrong with complexity. It starts with the voter rolls. The voter rolls are not cleaned up in a timely and thorough fashion, and each county clerk is responsible for doing that. And we have 44 counties in Idaho, and they all seem to go about it in a different way and in their own time horizon. There doesn't seem to be one set standard for purging the voter rolls in all 44 counties, and that effort should be led by the Secretary of State. It's not. There are counties in Idaho that have, 600, 1,000 voters. So it's not like it would take a tremendous amount of work to clean up that voter roll, because there are people voting in Idaho that are not legal voters, despite claims to the contrary here in Ada County and other places. So if we clean up the voter rolls, then it goes into how are people receiving their ballots? I don't like the whole idea of absentee voting, mail-in voting. I think it's just ripe with fraud. I definitely see that in other parts of the country, but it's got to be going on here as well. Is it widespread and rampant? I don't know that that's the case, but if somebody is, let's assume that one gets through and somebody votes illegally. All that does, Brian, is it cancels your legal vote or my legal vote, and that I object to. Even if it's one vote, I object to it strenuously, because that's not how our country should work. So cleaning up the voter rolls, let's make absentee voting a necessity because you're serving overseas in the military, or you have a confirmable medical condition that physically prevents you from voting on voting day. I think the period of voting is too long. I think we need to shorten it down to where you vote on election day, and we shorten up that window. I think that would help. I think on a federal level, you asked the question about a federal level, I think it should be a federal holiday. Everybody gets off that Tuesday in November, and you go do your thing. This economy will survive one more day when we have all these goofy holidays and we have things that are not that important. Who can't take a day off of work without the economy collapsing? It won't. I'd like to see it as a national holiday, and I don't trust these machines. I've heard everybody tell me, well, the machines are, they're all checked, they're certified, blah, blah, blah. I've got into some of the details. You're a computer genius. You know that any computer system that can be created by man can be manipulated by man, and I'm not so sure that that doesn't happen in our modern day elections. And if they want to instill trust in this, they're going to have to prove that those machines are controlled and locked down without question by each county clerk. And that is not the case in Idaho. and in other parts of the country. Last but not least, I want to be able to verify my vote. Nowhere in the great United States can you cast your ballot in a major election and verify that the county clerk counted your ballot for the candidate you cast the vote for. They can tell you you voted. They can tell you what time you voted. They can tell you where you voted. But they hide behind the secrecy of our ballot. And you cannot verify that they counted your vote for the guy you voted for, the man or woman. They can't. And they say, oh, it's under secrecy. Well, you know what? In this modern electronic world, why can't they give me some sort of a fancy system where they send me a barcode or a login, and it disappears after X amount of period of time? There are secure systems for computers that you could check just one time and one time only as the voter himself, not someone else, but me. I want to be able to verify my vote. I don't trust any of them, Brian. And that's what I'd like to see happen also.
Well, that would be perhaps a way to increase trust. It's said that a republic depends on the consent of the losers. And lately, we've seen both sides don't trust the outcome of our elections when they lose. And whatever happens next month and whatever happens in 2024, I don't see the losing side, whichever side that may be.
Right. I agree.
The results. So, being able to trust your elections is the bedrock of a democratic republic.
Well, the recent Rasmussen poll that came out, 52% of voters surveyed said that it was somewhat likely that the 2020 election was in some way flawed and would have likely affected the outcome of the final result. So 52% of a whole bunch of people is not just a conspiracy theory. Mm-hmm. About half of this country doesn't think that Joe Biden is a legitimate sitting United States president. He is the president, no question about it. He's the guy in the White House. But did he get there legitimately? I'm not convinced that he did.
And you ask, the Democrats will call that election denial, but then 80% of them will say that the 2016 election was defrauded somehow. Yes. So exactly. Neither side just trusts the system, and that's a very bad omen for a republic when neither side will trust it.
Indeed.
But I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me this afternoon, and I appreciate your candor. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you'd like to say? And also, where can viewers go to learn more about you?
Well, there's a couple things. Running as an independent conservative, we say it all in one breath. That's a big ask for the voters to take on. Many of my best friends are lifelong Republicans, conservatives, and here I am running as an independent, kind of throwing a wrench into the status quo or what they're used to doing. But my position is this. I think that it is time for change, and Albert Einstein said it best. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Well, that's what we're getting out of Washington, D.C. We keep sending the same type of representatives, so-called leaders there, and they're doing a lousy job. They have a horrible rating. Well, we're going to keep getting that same result unless we mix it up a little bit. So my plea is to the traditional Republican voters here in Idaho that are used to voting for the guy that has the R beside his name. I get it's difficult to vote for an independent, maybe for the first time in your life. That's a big ask. I truly understand that. But I'm asking for their vote and their support because I think that's going to be the only way we bring about true change. As far as finding out more about me as a candidate and what I'm all about, our events, how to volunteer, fundraising, all of that, everything in a modern campaign goes through the website, clevelandforsenate.com. Here, let me lean the right way. There you go. clevelandforsenate.com. It's backwards on TV. You can find out everything. You can send me a message if you like. We have a great staff here. Across this state, people are not happy with the status quo career politicians like Mike Crapo. And I think you're going to see a big surprise 32 days from now in the general election. I'd be honored and humbled to serve the good citizens of Idaho in the way that they truly deserve it, Brian.
Well, I will put your website in the show notes so people can just click on it if they're coming back and watching this later. But again, I appreciate your time. And I also, it's a big step for, a regular person like you, somebody who's not been in politics, to get out there and travel the state and take your message to the people. And I do commend you for that. That's that really is the essence of America, isn't it? That's what it was supposed to be.
Yep, and we're working hard at it. And you're right, that is what the framers had in mind.
Well, thank you for the time, and good luck.
Good to visit with you. Thanks for having me on, Brian. We'll talk soon.